everybody, and welcome to episode 1.4 of You're Off the Case, the Ottawa Hockey Podcast. I'm Clayton Johns alongside Jamie Shinkuski as we try to cover the past week of hockey here in the nation's capital. And Jamie, as always, we start with the Ottawa Senators.
Yes, thanks, Clayton. The Senators only had one game this past week where they were in Boston Tuesday night, where they lost 4-3 to the Bruins at the TD Gardens on Dennis Seidenberg's game-winning goal from center ice with 12:51 to go in the third. The Senators had a 3-2 lead going into the third period, but they blew that lead on Seidenberg's goal. And Kyle Turris continued his hot streak, scoring a goal. He now has 14 points in his first 20 games as a Sen. The Sens begin a 5-game homestand this week, Friday night when they take on the Islanders, and Saturday night they have the Battle of Ontario at home against the Maple Leafs, where the Sens lead that season series 3-1. Now, they only had one game this past week because of the All-Star game that was held here in Ottawa.
Yes, the NHL All-Star game here in the nation's capital. Team Chara defeating Team Alfredson 12-9. Daniel Alfredson scoring 2 goals in the loss for the team that he captained. One of the more interesting things in the NHL All-Star Game was one of the charity events put on by Scott Hartnell. One of the more interesting things we've seen ever in the NHL All-Star Game or in the NHL altogether, and you're going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, Scott Hartnell's play style, he falls a lot, and 2 fans started tabulating how much he does fall, causing the start for Hartnell down. Now, Hartnell donated 1,000 times every time he fell in the All-Star Game, 4 times, which led to $4,000 being donated to charity. He also has a website, hartnelldown.com, where you can order t-shirts and toques where proceeds go to charity. So he turned a fun thing from fans into a charity event, and they also count how many times Hartnell falls down in one season.
Also pretty good. Pretty sure the count right now is at 200 falls for Scott Hartnell in the season. hartnelldown.com, ladies and gentlemen, check it out if you got a spare minute. Now shift our focus to the Ontario Hockey League and the Ottawa 67s. The past week, the 67s had another 3 games in 3 nights. Friday, January the 27th, they kicked it off at home against the Sarnia Sting in a nationally televised game on Rogers Sportsnet, defeating the Sting 5-2. Shane Prince, Mike Cazzola, and Cody Ceci each had 2-point games for the 67s. Ceci scoring the game-winning goal. Now Yakupov did play in this hockey game. Ladies and gentlemen, after we told you last week he wouldn't play in this game, the announcement was made after we recorded the show. We apologize for that. Saturday, January the 28th, the 67s were in Barrie to take on the Colts, and they dropped that decision 2-1 to the Colts, Barrie scoring 2 unanswered goals in the third period. And Sunday, the 67s moved further north to take on the Owen Sound Attack, and they won that game 3-1. Shane Prince scored the game-winning goal in the third period. But the 67s lost Cody Ceci in the second period to what is believed to be either a stiff back or a pinched nerve, which forced him to miss the CHL-NHL Top Prospects game in Kelowna, and he is doubtful for Friday's game against the Oshawa Generals. As I mentioned, this Friday the Oshawa Generals are in town to take on the Ottawa 67s, and Saturday afternoon the Kingston Frontenacs are in town for a prostate cancer awareness game. The 67s will be sporting blue barber pole jerseys that will be auctioned off online after the game. Pretty cool looking jersey. Folks, you can check out some pictures of those online at ottawa67s.com. We welcome now to the show our first ever guest at You're Off the Case, Jon Willemsen, the broadcaster for the CCHL's Ottawa Junior Senators, the Junior A circuit here in Ottawa. And John, the teams in the league preparing for the playoff run here as we close out the season, the final month. About 10 to 15 games remaining for most of the teams. For our listeners who don't know, could you maybe explain how the playoff format works for the league?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I guess this is kind of a historic moment, the first guest in your Off the Case history, and I'm glad I could be on the show. But you bring up the question about the playoff format. It's pretty simple. It's a 12-team league with 6 in each division, the Iserman and the Robinson division. However, it's not structured like your normal format where you have the 4 top teams in each division. They actually have just the top 8 teams, regardless of their division, are the teams that make the playoffs, and they're seeded like your classic 1 versus 8, 2 versus 7, 3, 6, and 4, 5.
Makes sense to have the best teams make the playoffs rather than having somebody with more points that maybe gets the short end of the stick and doesn't make the playoffs. We're going to focus a little bit more on the Ottawa Junior Senators, the team actually located in the city, the team that you broadcast for. They're currently sitting right around the 500 mark. In a playoff position right now. What are the chances they keep that position, and what spot do you think they might slide into, considering the top 4 slots are pretty much locked up by the Nepean Raiders, the Cornwall Colts, Carleton Place Canadians, and then the Brockville Braves?
Well, I think they're going to have to play a little bit better hockey in the second or in the last 10 games going into the playoffs, because you want to go into the playoffs on some form of a rhythm if you want to give yourself a chance. And with them especially, they're very close to falling out of the playoff picture. However, I still think that you mentioned already where I think they'll slide in. I think they'll probably go in that 6 or 7 spot range, because currently Smiths Falls and Canada are fighting over that final spot in the playoffs. And if those guys seem to be fighting for the 8th spot, and Ottawa are just above them right now at number 7, and I think that's probably where Ottawa will slide, if I could say, like 7 or 6. But that playoff, it'll be tough to see, or it's tough to project where it'll happen, because the teams are all so close right now. So they just gotta try to play a little bit better hockey. They don't have an overly difficult end of the year, so I could still see them going above 500 in their final dozen games.
The Senators currently sit in that 6th position overall in the league, 51 points through 50 games so far. And as you mentioned, over that last 10 games, they want to go into the playoffs on a high. Unfortunately, they've got some of the tougher opponents to come across in the final 12 games of the season, but they also play some of the bottom teams. How do they balance and try to play hockey that's better than 500 and make sure they get into that playoff spot?
Well, throughout the year, from what I've seen the Jr.Sens play, is they have a lot of trouble with the weaker teams, which is a little bit backwards. You would normally think like the good teams would be the teams that would give them a lot tougher contests. And it's true that they do lose often to the good teams in the league, but they also lose too often to the teams that are outside the playoff picture. And they've lost once to Kempville, they've lost once or twice to Gloucester, and they have a lot of trouble with Cumberland. And those are the 3 weakest teams in the entire league. So if you can't beat those teams, it's tough to say how good your chances will be of getting into the playoffs. But so they have 3 games or 4 games out of their final 12 against those 3 teams. If they can win all 4 of those, then it takes the pressure off them when they have to play against the Nepeans and the Carleton Places, and that section of the league's elite.
Now, you mentioned anything can happen pretty much on any given night in this league, and anything can happen through the playoffs. What are the chances that maybe one of these bottom teams goes on a run in the playoffs and could knock off one of these top 4 seeds?
I would not be surprised at all, actually. I think that this is going to be one of those rare years where, especially with the Pembroke Lumber Kings losing the majority of their team, there are, on paper right now, there's the 4 clear frontrunners. You've got Nepean, Carleton Place, Cornwall, and Brockville, and those 3 have already clinched a playoff spot. They've separated themselves, and that will be the final 4, or the top 4, rather, in the playoffs. But that bottom 4, you've got Pembroke on a rare off year, you've got Ottawa, and then you've got Hawkesbury as well, and then Smiths Falls or Canada. And those teams throughout the season have shown that they can compete with the league's elite. Ottawa, from what I've seen, they've beaten Nepean, they've beat Carleton Place. So anything can happen in a 7-game series, especially. It's not a 1-game do or die. And I think that it'll be very interesting to see how these teams are able to handle the stronger competition in the playoffs, because I think that I think anything can happen, really. I think that I wouldn't be surprised at all if a team in the 5 to 8 range won the entire playoffs, although, albeit, the favorites are still the favorites.
Very much true for any playoff series, especially in this small league as well. Final question, we're a little bit tight for time. What is your prediction for the playoffs as to who might emerge? Canada's hosting the Fred Page Cup this year. They are very much on the bubble right now as to making the playoffs. Pembroke doesn't look as though they're in serious contention to repeat as Canadian champions. They're kind of sitting around that 5th or 6th spot right now. But what's your prediction as to who wins it all?
If I got to pick right now, I'm going to have to go with one of the top 4 in the favorites. I already said that I wouldn't be surprised if a team from 5 to 8 won the entire thing. And I got to cheer for the Jr.Sens because they're the team that I always work for when I call their games. But I think it's going to be tough to just say anybody. It's tough to pick a favorite right now because they're all so close. But if I have to pick a team right now, from what I've seen throughout the entire season, I really think the Carleton Place Canadians may be the best team in the entire league. Nepean is great, and they made some big deadline moves. And you mentioned Canada; they beefed up at the trade deadline, but I don't know if they're even going to make the playoffs anyway. But it's going to be it's tough to call somebody that I think is going to win. And if I have to pick right now, I think that Carleton Place is the deepest team, and they have the best chance right now to win.
Well, there you have it, Jon Willemsen's prediction. The Carleton Place Canadians could be the champions here in the CCHL this year. Thanks, John, for being our first ever guest here on You're Off the Case.
Thank you for having me.
Jon Willemsen, the broadcaster for the Ottawa Junior Senators of the Central Canadian Hockey League. And now we move along to one of our regular segments, the Name of the Week.
Yes, the Name of the Week. This week we are still in the Ontario Hockey League where he has 56 points in 46 games this season, and after being traded from the Erie Otters to the London Knights, he is averaging 2 points a game in his first 11 contests. Hailing from St. Thomas, Ontario, Toronto Maple Leafs prospect, a great rhyming name, Greg McKegg.
Greg McKegg, great Leafs prospect. He's having a great year now following that trade from the Erie Otters to the London Knights. He has 22 points in 11 games with the Knights so far this season. Definitely turned his season around, giving him a chance at an OHL and possibly a Memorial Cup championship in his what is likely his final season in the Ontario Hockey League. Our next segment, the fourth line fact of the week, goes out to the desert and probably one of the better known fourth line players in the National Hockey League.
This week we looked at Twitter where at BizNasty 2.0 Coyotes forward Paul Bissonnette leads the NHL in one category and one category only. Twitter followers per NHL point. 8 career NHL points in 120 games played gives Paul Bissonnette 27,220 followers per point in the NHL.
As you said, that is the only category in which Paul Bissonnette could possibly lead the NHL. He has 8 points in 120 games played, but definitely a character player down there in the desert for the Phoenix Coyotes. Our final segment of the day, the You're Off the Case moment of the week. And this week it goes to both Craig Anderson and Michael Neuwirth, who were both scored on in the same week on shots from center ice. Craig Anderson, as we mentioned earlier in the show, was beat on a shot by Dennis Seidenberg that was the game winner for Boston Tuesday night. And then Michael Samuelsson fooled an ill-prepared Michael Neuwirth Wednesday night in Florida as the Panthers defeated Washington. Samuelsson beat Neuwirth on a really, really bad shot from center ice. Those are just those saves that you have to make, Jamie.
Yeah, the goaltender never likes to let in those long-range goals. The most famous would still have to be when Vesa Toskala let in that goal from 200 feet, but you never want to let in a goal from center ice, and Craig Anderson and Michael Neuwirth, just like Sergei Bobrovsky, you're off the case. Anyway, folks, that's all the time we have for this week. We'll be coming back to you approximately same time from the same place in 1 week from now.
Thank you for tuning in, everybody. This has been episode 1.4 of You're Off the Case, the Ottawa Hockey Podcast. I'm Clayton Johns alongside Jamie Shinkuski. Thank you for joining us on this day, February the 2nd, 2012.
I believe the world is burning to the ground.